Welcome to the tutorial for Entrelac in the round. We'll start with chaining 11 stitches. 1, 2, 3. And 11 chains. So we want to work on the back side of our work, and being careful not to pull this first loop too tight. We want to pick up or insert our hook under that back bump of the very first chain to pull up a loop, and then we can sort of tighten up that first loop just a bit, and we will pick up in until we have 7 loops on our hook. So in each of the back bum, insert our hook and pull up a loop. Seven loops on the hook. So we're going to leave the rest of the chains unworked at this point. We will work them later on. Yarn over, pull through the first 2 loops, and we'll continue to yarn over, pull through 2 loops until there's only 1 loop left on our hook. So that's our foundation row for the first square of Entrelac in the round. For row 2, we'll start with the second bar from the hook, vertical bar, yarn over to pull up a loop, and we'll continue until we have these 6 loops on our hook. And then we're going to insert our hook in the next back bump of the next chain on our beginning chain to pull up a loop. You can see how that will start curving that chain. It's going to form our side border. And working the return pass, yarn over, pull through 2 until 1 loop remains on our hook. And then rows 3, 4, and 5 we do in the same manner as we did row 2. Just a tip for your starting hook is to pull that loop tighter onto your hook to start before you pull up a loop, and it will stretch as you do that. You can see my row 2 side loop is pulled. I didn't snug it in and it's stretched too large. So we want to keep that first loop tighter on our hook as we pick up our loops. So you can go ahead and work rows 3, 4, and 5 the same as we did row 2, picking up that last loop in the unused chain and working the return pass. So after the 5th row, you should look something like this. You'll have that 1 chain left on our starting chain. Now we'll work what's called the bind off row. So we'll insert our hook under this second vertical bar, yarn over, pull up and through the loop on our hook. We want to keep this bind off row fairly loose. We don't want to pull these slip stitches tight. We'll just work our way across. And then after we've worked all the vertical bars, we'll insert our loop in the back bump of that last chain from our starting chain. Pick up the loop. So we'll pull the yarn through and through the loop on our hook. And then we'll yarn over, pull through one more time, and pull really tight the tie off knot. Now we're going to work a square on all 4 sides of our starting square. I have switched colors just for you to be able to see a little bit better where these next squares fit in with our first square. So to start, we will work a chain of 5. And turning onto those back bumps of that very first chain, we'll insert our hook, pull up a loop, and in each of the chains across. We should have 6 loops on our hook at this point. Then we will insert, so our square was like this when we finished, under those unworked loops of that starting chain, the top one of the side of our first square. Insert our loop to pick up our 7th loop. Yarn over, pull through 2 until there's 1 loop left on the hook. And then we'll work the next 4 rows in simple stitch. So you just pull up a loop under each of those vertical bars. And then for the last loop, you'll go down the next row or the next side stitch of our starting square. Insert, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 until there's 1 loop left on your hook. So you can work that. That's 2 rows we've done together. You want to work rows 3, 4, and 5, and I'll meet you at that point. So after our 5 rows, we'll make the bind off row. And again, it's like making a slip stitch in each of these vertical bars, remembering to keep it loose and not pull these loops through tightly. So for our last bind off stitch, we want to go on the first stitch at the top of the next side of the block to work that last bind off and make our tie off knot. Then when to start the next square, we will chain 5, working in the back bump of each chain, inserting our hook to pick up a loop. And then we insert our hook into that same stitch as we did the tie off knot from that last square to pick up our last loop and work the return pass. And then we work the next rows in the same manner, picking up a stitch. So inserting our hook under that bar, picking up a loop by yarning over, and then inserting our hook in the next stitch to pull up the loop and work the return pass. Okay, so you'll continue working that across, making sure you do the bind off row after each square and the tie off knot, and you can finish working those 4 squares around. Now for round 2, we will take a contrasting color. We are going to make what are referred to as top squares. They will sit along the top of each of these squares that we made last round. And after we work one of the top squares, we're also going to work a square that fits in between these 2 squares from round 1, and then we'll make another top square, and so on. So you just join your color with a slip stitch. It doesn't matter which square that you start at. And in that very first stitch along the top, you will join with a slip stitch to start. Then we work this square in exactly the same way, where we chain 5, turn it over, pick up the next loop on that back bump of the chain, so you should have 6 loops on your hook. Enter into that same stitch to pick up the 7th loop, yarn over, pull through 2 to make the return pass. So you can go ahead and make rows 2, 3, 4, and 5 as well, and doing your bind off row using this top stitch over there, and I'll meet you at that point for the in-between square. So at this point, when we do that tie off knot, that you want to make sure you pull it really, really tight, or this hole in the stitch will stretch out too far the more we work. So now we want to make this in-between square. So we'll just go into these top V's of these side stitches, or the top stitches from our square, pull up our loops across 5. So we have our 6 loops on the hook. Now to get the 7th loop, we want to get this knot where the tie-off knot was, but this first side loops of the next square. So I'll leave my loop a little bit loose right now so you can see where I've joined. And you want to keep that loop similar size. Yarn over, pull through 2. To start that next square. And we'll continue to work the rows of this in-between square, picking up our loops as simple stitch and making the connection or joining to the side of the next square. We call that the connection loop. So that's 2 rows, so we want to make a total of 5 rows for this square as well. Do your bind off row as well and make the tie off knot in that first stitch at the top side of the square. So now we're ready to make another top square. So right from where we left off, we chain 5, chain 5, we'll pick up a loop in the back bump of each of these chains. And then insert in the same stitch as our bind off. We'll pick up our loop and do the return pass. And then we'll continue making the other rows across this next top square. And then we just continue working around with an in-between square, top square, in-between, and so off, joining to the base of our last square at the end of this round. And then each additional round, you would increase the number of in-between squares in between our top squares. And that is the basics of entrelac in the round. On the final square, you want to make the last bind off in the same stitch as we started the first square of this round, and make the tie off knot, and then you would fasten off. So that would be round 2.